There's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Joining us from Massachusetts is Chipo Dendere. She focuses on democratization and African politics as a visiting assistant professor at Amherst College. With us from London is Joseph Ochieno. He's a writer and commentator on African affairs. Nhlanhla Sehume is a South African journalist and news anchor. He joins us from Johannesburg. And with us from Harare via Skype is Bright Matonga. He served as a member of parliament and Zimbabwe's deputy minister of information. And let's start right there in Harare with Bright Matonga. Bright, we just heard the Zimbabwean opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, tell us that Zimbabweans are now worse off than they were last November when the new leader took over. What is your view of how the country is faring a year after Robert Mugabe departed?
Obviously, Honorable Chamisha's statement is a political statement. It's meant to put pressure on the government, which is what opposition is supposed to be doing. But obviously, the situation on the ground, yes, there are shortages in terms of fuel, there's a currency confusion, the shortages of, well, not shortages of commodities, but shortages of forex, which then impacts negatively on the cost of buying goods. Whilst the government says the rate of exchange to the dollar is 1:1, but what is trading on the parallel market is 1:3. But again, these are part and parcel of government's transitional stabilization program, which is a program that is meant to stabilize the economy after many years of sluggish economic reforms. But the good thing is that, on the domestic front, because there are two things, domestic and international. On the domestic front, yes, people are feeling the pinch. But we can't say they are worse off because we talk about freedoms, which is very important. We talk about agriculture production, which has gone up. There's food, the harvest was good. Tobacco is very good. We're embarking on the mining side of things. But yes, it's very painful at the moment. And the government has given a warning that it's not going to be easy. You have to, to brace ourselves for these painful economic reforms. But then people are saying, for how long? I think that is the question. But it's very difficult at the moment. I can't say, things are rosy and all that. But the positive thing is that we have a listening president. He is willing to make reforms. People can freely express themselves without fear of intimidation. So there are a number of positives, and obviously, whenever there's a positive, there has to be a negative.
Joseph Ochieno, Zimbabwe's leaders are asking for time and patience to tackle the country's problems. As we heard in our report, there have been political reforms, but the economy still remains a challenge. What is your view on the path that Zimbabwe is taking right now?
I think Zimbabwe is a country that, if we were where we are today, we would certainly not amongst the best economists in the world, would necessarily have projected where exactly today Zimbabwe would be economically. So from an economic point of view, I think it's a very difficult one for anybody else to say. But that being said, I think probably my biggest optimism, and in part is part of what Bright has talked about, is the possibility that there's a president and a system in place by and large, and of course the opposition will have a different view, that is open, that is listening, that is attempting actually to cause change. But I think what Zimbabweans, including I think even some people in ZANU-PF, particularly even some of the people who did not necessarily agree with Mugabe as of today, don't really recognize how deep a ditch Zimbabwe had gone over the last 20 or so years. So it's going to take a huge amount of time. I actually think that the priority that the president has put, particularly on national reconciliation, and quite impressed with the fact that actually he brought in former President Mutante of South Africa to come actually to head the commission for investigating the violence of the other year. The perception in politics is extremely important. So if there is to be a genuine reconciliation, if there is to be an open space in which Zimbabweans see themselves once again as Zimbabweans, then I think that may be what is actually required. Because unfortunately for Zimbabwe, the international community has had a very slow response to the change that has actually taken place in the last 12 months or so. So there is a sufficient, there's an urgent need for injection of foreign direct investments inside Zimbabwe if really anything is to change immediately. The ordinary Zimbabweans, yes, by and large, they will be quite fine with security. But people like to see that actually the prices are not going high, that they're basic stuff in their shops, and that they're able to go to school and they're able to go to hospital and get medicine. Some of those are things that are actually, by and large, for the next 12 months at least, is substantially beyond the hands of the government of Zimbabwe. And for those partners of Zimbabwe, and those people who contributed in part beyond the Zimbabwean government, rather Robert Mugabe, should really actually wake up. And thanks to your program, in my opinion, amongst others in the West, the world needs really to come and join all Zimbabweans. Otherwise, the vast majority of the people in Zimbabwe, the poor ones, are the ones who are perhaps suffering today. But long term, I think I'm quite as optimistic as any average Zimbabwean.
Chipo, as we heard in our report, the opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, he's been very critical of the current government. Let's listen to another comment that he made. Let's watch this.
Bad as it might appear that we've had a situation where we lost innocent lives, we must also understand that it has brought to the fore the fundamental issues that this nation is broken, that our politics is rotten, that violence is at the center of our politics. We have no gun. The only gun we have had is the Constitution. The Constitution is our gun. That's why we always go to the constitutional platforms to try and articulate and deal with our issues.
So, Chipo, very tough words there from Nelson Chamisa. There was, of course, a great deal of elation after Robert Mugabe left office. All kinds of promises were made, brighter days ahead for Zimbabwe. But listening to what Nelson Chamisa says there, does he have a point?
Well, I think, you know, the new president and ZANU-PF made a lot of promises in November, and they promised Zimbabweans quick change. They promised Zimbabweans that they were going to fix the economy. And then a year later, people can't afford their blood pressure medication. People are going to hospitals with children and being told that they're not accepting the local currency. The earlier member of parliament spoke and said that the government is saying that the local currency is at par with the US dollar. But people can't use that money in shops. So people can't access the basic commodities. And to add salt to injury, the commission that just ended, the president has said that the report is just for his eyes. How can a report on the death of at least 6 people be for the president's eyes only, when in fact we know that the president is the only one who can deploy the military? So who sent the military? Who gave the orders to kill people? If we're saying that the biggest change has been the freedoms that have been given people, then why shoot at people that are protesting? Protesting is at the heart of what makes democracy work. So if people can't protest, if people are afraid of protesting, if people are afraid of expressing themselves, then how different is Emmerson Mnangagwa from Robert Mugabe? These are the tough questions that Emmerson Mnangagwa must face for himself. Where is the report, right? We watched the commission. It was more of a circus than anything else. There was no justice for the people that died in August. There was no justice for the Zimbabweans that participated in elections. And so these are really, really tough questions that the president has to be willing to address. He says he's a listening president, but you have to show the action, right? If you're listening, then you have to say to people, this is what happened August 1st. This is the responsibility that I'm taking. And these are the actions that we're going to take to make sure that the military does not intervene with civilian politics ever again. Because the loss of life is not something that we can just gloss over and talk about positive change that Emmerson Mnangagwa has brought without addressing the death of 6 citizens.
All right, I want to get to Johannesburg in a moment, but Bright, let me get your response very quickly on what you've just heard there. As Chipo points out, these are very tough questions that need to be answered.
Well, they are tough questions. If we cherry pick, if we take things into perspective, I think it's been very open. Mnangagwa's government, the mandate he's got is only 3 months into his presidency. The previous ones from November, it wasn't his, it was Mugabe's term. But I think we have to be very positive. A loss of 1 person is too many. That's why he called it a commission. But I think people have been cherry picking on the points that they want to make. yes, is the president that called for that commission of inquiry. For anyone to call it a circus, I think is an insult into the people that were conducting that. The report will be made public. I'm sure she missed that report. It will be made public, but it has to be the president's side first. Then it's going to be made public. Then people can criticize. Not now. People are demanding answers before they conclude the report.
Okay, I want to move on. Let's go to Johannesburg to Nhlanhla Sehume. Nhlanhla, South Africa no doubt plays a really big part in Zimbabwe's fortunes. We had thousands of Zimbabweans who moved to South Africa in search of jobs during the Mugabe era. But what is the feeling in South Africa now that the new leader has taken over in Zimbabwe?
Well, Anant, the excitement or the euphoria that followed the election of President Emmerson Mnangagwa seems to have faded or kind of waned a bit, because a lot of Zimbabweans, or at least the ones that I've spoken to, Zimbabwean nationals, have expressed their disappointment at the current state of their country. Many Zimbabwean nationals who are in South Africa have expressed their concern around the state of the economy, the declining economy, and have also spoken about the country's very repressive government, is describing it as pretty much a same of the old guard, saying nothing really much has changed. So they're very critical about the current government, and many have kind of lost hope to even return to their country and contribute towards building a new Zimbabwe. Many have said that even despite the end of what they've described as an era in Robert Mugabe, this new era has delivered very little. They say that Zimbabweans back home are still struggling. You know, the income inequality is still quite major. Issues around getting the essentials, you know, things like oil, things like food or chicken, or things like the basic necessities, basically, are hard to find in Zimbabwe. They've also touched very much about the recent commission, or the commission headed by former South African President Nhlanhla Sehume, being very critical of Motlanthe, saying that the commission that he presided over was pretty much a whitewash, a sham, and deserves no credibility. So many Zimbabweans are describing the state of Zimbabwe right now as one that doesn't inspire hope of a new and progressive Zimbabwe.
Okay, we need to take a quick break right now. More of our conversation when we return. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.